Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mackenzie Vinci. I'm the Events and Communications Coordinator here at the Greater New Haven Chamber of Commerce, and I am so excited that we are having our Practical AI webinar this afternoon. So to kick things off, I am going to hand it over to Dave Ferreira, who is from Charter Oak, and he is the sponsor of our Technology Council. Dave?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. So we're really proud to be a sponsor here today. So Charter Oak State College is Connecticut's public online state college. We're part of this Connecticut State College and University system, and we are an unabashed workforce college. So we're about making sure that everyone is ready for basically the AI workforce, post-AI world. So this is a really timely webinar, and I thank Rock for doing this because I think, as we know, this is revolutionizing the way that we go ahead and work. There was actually a recent study by IC with Intuit, and 89% of business owners indicated that someone at their business is currently using AI tools. Although our studies have also shown that only about half of them are doing so effectively. So they're already using it in your workplace, but what we want to do is be able to make sure that everyone is able to utilize these tools in a safe and effective manner. And I think a lot of the practical applications that you're going to hear from today is really comes at a really crucial time. So definitely looking forward to today, and also following us over at Charter Oak to find out how we're going to be collaborating with the Greater New Haven Chamber and others to make sure that we prepare our workforce, and not only those that are coming into the workforce, but also reskilling those that are currently in the workforce. So with that, Mackenzie, thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you so much, Dave, and we're so happy to bring you on board with our Technology Council. So now I will hand it over to Rock Vitale. He's the founder and CEO of EC, and he is going to deliver our presentation today as he is our Technology Council chair.
Awesome. Thanks, Mackenzie, and thanks to the Chamber for hosting this webinar, and thanks to Dave and Charter Oak for your remarks and sponsorship of the council. So again, very excited to share this information. It's a very timely and relevant topic, I think, kind of in the broader landscape. But the goal of this webinar is to really show you practical AI and automation examples as a business leader to see that there's a lot you can do with these systems beyond just chatbots and ChatGPT, and how to really see some real world examples that we've seen be really impactful for people in the business world. So a little bit more about who I am and what we do. My company's called Easy. We do implementation solutions for AI and automation. We've been doing this work since 2018 and have done about 600 projects in this area. And so we see kind of different types of ways you can use these systems, but we've been working in this field long before ChatGPT was released to the public. So really excited to see this kind of increased interest in these types of systems. So quick summary of the agenda. We're going to do a little housekeeping, go over kind of the purpose of the presentation, talk about what AI is and what it's not, think about how to prioritize what to work on and what to focus on within your organization, go through some examples and suggestions about best practices and training, and then there'll be a chance at the end to do Q&A. So with that, we will dive in. So just some quick housekeeping. We're covering a lot of information in a short period of time. And so this is meant to be high level while still maintaining some level of detail that is useful. The goal here is that you can walk away with a few examples where you can say like, hey, that's actually something I can look into immediately as a result of seeing this webinar. Like I said, there will be a Q&A after the presentation. So if you do have questions, definitely feel free to drop them there in the comment box. And then also there will be a replay available of this webinar on YouTube. So we're recording this, and this will be something where you can share it with your colleagues if they were unable to attend. So with that, let's dive in. So first of all, The goal of this session is to give you real world practical examples of high priority use cases we've seen with different organizations in the past, including startups, established businesses in the middle market, nonprofit organizations, and publicly traded companies at the enterprise level. So these systems really broadly can help almost any type of organization, whether it's for profit, nonprofit, or even the public sector. And so really interesting kind of use cases that we'll go over here. But with that in mind, different tools exist for automation. There's some implementation mistakes to be aware of. There's some things to think about in terms of cost and whether, the system needs to be a certain level of advanced, or if you can get away with kind of more simplified systems. You really want to find what's right for your own organization. And critically, there are times where some tools are overkill. But the sort of bottom line of all of this is that AI and automation can significantly save you time. It can reduce manual work, and it can keep your team focused. So, besides the fact that at the, large organization level, you can really achieve operational excellence, as it's called, for startups and for small businesses too. You really can do a lot with a small team, and you can have somewhat of an advantage being able to move quickly without needing to scale up a bunch of people in order to kind of grow your small business. And so these systems really help with maximizing the sort of things that people want to focus on. It helps reduce things like manual entry, and your actual team members can focus on what's actually useful and important to your business, instead of manual activities and clicking things and things that software can do. So again, key thing here is we're not just talking about AI, we're also talking about traditional automation as well. So sending data between systems, applying business rules to different scenarios, and operating on that data in a way that it reduces the amount of clicks and manual activities that you have to do as an operator. So real quick, I think just a few kind of things to clear up about AI. What is AI and what is it not? AI at the high level really is a prediction system trained on a large volume of data. It's a multi-layered algorithm, basically, that has been trained on a huge amount of data that is able to basically predict what either the next word should be or what the output should be of the system in a way that is useful to people. And so these systems are, on a high level, mathematical formulas that are outputting large vector representations that are then translated into text or other media. And it's really interesting because on a high level, it looks like it's sentient, or that it's talking to you, or that it is like, having opinions and stuff. But really, when you break it down, it's not sentient. It's not conscious or aware of what it's saying or doing. It's literally just inputs and outputs. So there's no like, conscious entity on the other side of it that has motivations or is, planning things. It may appear at times to do that, but that's because it's been trained on data from people that talk in certain ways, et cetera. So really kind of critical to understand that. Right now, where AI is, it's able to complete simple tasks, essentially unsupervised. We've seen systems where, for example, an AI system does data entry and it reduces the amount of work required by 99%. And so it can handle some simple tasks really quickly and in an unsupervised way. Critically, though, after being tested. I will say that while there are advancements being made, AI systems can sometimes break down for complex tasks that require a deep amount of reasoning, or multiple steps, or a deep level of complexity where you can see a lot of variation and edge cases, et cetera, where a person might be able to be like, oh, I see on this document this information is crossed out or whatever, or I see that, this super specific thing is happening, and I can understand it. But AI systems can sometimes get confused in those scenarios. What's really interesting is most of these large language models that you interact with today that are for generalized purposes are multimodal, meaning they can handle large amounts of unstructured data like text, images, files, videos, audio, and other media types. Super interesting medium that you can interact with. It can these AI systems like Claude, for example, can also interact with your digital systems like Google Drive and folders and other uh, tools. So it's useful for automating business processes that require interpretation, data entry, large documents, and data sets. And so we've found that most of these systems are semi-automated for the most part, where you still have a person kind of in the loop, if you will. And in some of these cases, you are just supplementing the traditional automation with an AI model, where the AI model might be used for certain steps to structure the data that then goes to a traditional algorithm. So we tell people you don't want to use AI if you don't have to. It's not the solution for every single thing. Sometimes it really is like you can write a mathematical formula to analyze the data, but the AI model might be useful for getting the data into the format that you want, for example. So that's all just to say that AI is not a replacement for humans. It does not replace people in terms of decision making or these really high consequence decisions that you really would person to do the final check on. Because in some small scenarios, especially if you don't configure the system correctly, it can what's called hallucinate, where it creates an output that it's confidently incorrect about, where it says, hey, this is the answer for sure, but it's actually just totally wrong. That does happen. That's happened in some high profile scenarios. And so that's all just to say too that these systems aren't perfect. And this is why not only designing a good system is critically important, but also testing the system so that you are really identifying those edge cases and robustly saying, hey, we're certain that this is working the way that we want it to. And then, of course, having controls in place to, especially if it's a high consequence decision, you know, because these AI models are being used all over the place. They're being used not only for things like helping people do data entry or helping people write an email, but they're also being used for things like making decisions about health insurance, deciding criminal sentencing for people, deciding if somebody should receive a loan. So there's all kinds of really high priority, high consequence decisions that really require deep controls if you're using it for that. So we've created this matrix here. Everybody loves a good matrix, and I swear I'll keep the buzzwords to a minimum here. But when you're looking at your organization, you want to decide what you're going to work on in terms of what's the high priority item that we want to focus on to see if we want to do AI or automation on our specific operations. Almost every successful implementation that we've seen involves pilot projects. So it's a scenario where you do a feasibility study, you analyze your operations, and then you focus on some high priority use cases instead of just trying to do every single thing. If you try and do every single thing, you're not going to get anything completed because it's too much. And so figure out to your own operation, what are your high impact, high frequency pain points that you have? So if you look on this matrix here, you can see high impact, high frequency. Those are the high priority pilot projects that you want to focus on. Conversely, things that are low impact, low frequency, low priority, who cares? Even though it might feel cool to work on those problems and it might be fun to create something that's working, if at the end of the day it doesn't provide business value to you, it's not important. And then, of course, you got kind of the middle of the road. You got sort of the high impact, low frequency, or the low impact, high frequency. Those things can still be helpful to apply these pilot projects to, even though they might be lower priority than your high impact, high frequency work. So that's our pain point prioritization matrix. Everybody loves a good matrix on a Thursday. So there's that. And this is all just to say, on a high level, what are your hair on fire problems? And I think when we think about it this way, I'm sure that you can all think of hair on fire problems. And if anybody in the Q&A wants to share some hair on fire problems they might be having, would love to hear them. But I'm sure we can all relate to this guy on the right here. We've all been this person before at some time in our lives where something requires a huge amount of effort and is critically important in order to succeed. So, we've all had to put our work boots on and go enter a bunch of data into a system or, click a bunch of things on a website, all kinds of things we can think of. But what are your unique hair on fire problems is how you want to think back on this pain point prioritization matrix. All right, so with that, we'll go into some use cases. So the first use case I want to touch on is one that I think kind of comes pretty obviously to most of us. When ChatGPT came out in 2022. I think we all immediately saw, okay, we could use chatbots for all kinds of things. And chatbots indeed are something that we are seeing people include, but there's so much more to it than this. And that's why I really wanted to make this just the first use case, because we kind of obviously want to acknowledge that chatbots are useful, but just bolting a chatbot onto your system doesn't, you know, make your organization 10 times more productive. Oftentimes it helps with answering questions. So we've seen it be useful for things like employee onboarding or putting this on your website so that your public users that are looking at your website can ask questions about your business. Or if you have kind of an internal system that requires specialized knowledge and you want it to be able to answer kind of frequently asked questions, you can do that. But it's useful for all kinds of things, especially because you can fine tune it to answer questions in a specific way. So out of the box, you know, a chat GPT or something's not as useful, but if you fine tune a chat bot to answer specific questions, it can answer in your brand voice, and it can answer questions that are not known to the public without compromising your data or security. And so, yeah, super interesting, super fascinating, and it can reduce customer request volume by 75%. So it's super interesting, and it can really reduce the amount of manual answers you have to do. So we have a couple chatbots installed on some customer websites right now, and it dramatically reduced the amount of time they've had to address those things. It made it easier for the customer too, because they see the answer immediately, and it gives you the option to escalate up to another person. So a lot more you can do with this. You can use chatbots not only for answering questions, but you can use them for actually doing other things like scheduling appointments or interacting with your systems, where they can make changes to your database, or they can you know, send people certain files related to their account. And so it's not just questions and answers. It can actually interact with tools that are unique to your business as well. But this doesn't have to be some crazy engineering effort too. These things can be implemented relatively quickly. There's some low code tools out there, but also, you know, kind of out of the box, there's relatively simple ways to do this. So a lot of these AI tools are not as scary as you might think from like an engineering standpoint, especially if you do have any sort of business technology systems already that can integrate with them. And most people we found do have either like a you know, like a QuickBooks or a HubSpot, or, you know, I'm sure a lot of you are using Salesforce. All of these tools can integrate really nicely with these AI systems. So then the next example, this is another one that I think kind of naturally comes to a lot of us. I'm sure everybody's used ChatGPT or Claude to write an email at some point. And while out of the box, it's not always very good at writing emails. Again, you can prompt these things with prompt engineering, or you can train them to speak in a certain way. But you could use large language models for content creation. So this can be super helpful with marketing and with cold outreach if you're doing sort of these outreach campaigns, or for synthesizing unstructured notes that you might dictate to it or that might be coming from another place, taking those notes and then turning them into useful information like memos or newsletters or other content that you can then proofread and, you know, et cetera. It's really good at getting the message to like a 90% completion. In some cases, it'll do a flawless execution, but I'm sure we've all seen emails from people, or we've seen a LinkedIn post from somebody where we say, that was written by AI for sure. That thing has a bunch of long dashes in it. It has a bunch of language that's like, this isn't X, it's Y. And it's just very clear sort of AI giveaways that somebody just randomly generated some AI slop and posted it on LinkedIn. You want to be careful creating content with AI, because it can come off as cheesy or as just obviously generated by AI. People don't want to read it when that's the case. And so really having it be supplemented by actual data and giving it as much context as possible about how you want it to speak, what things you want it to avoid doing, like long dashes, and you know, being able to personalize it as much as possible to what your audience is. And so this is all to say, like, if you're using it to write emails, especially on like a mass scale, or if you're using it to answer questions for a specific customer, personalize it as much as possible. AI is really great for personalization. You can always also create, if you're doing emails, for example, you create an email where only some of it is AI generated. So you can have your email template, and then you've got a situation where you have sort of sentences that you can customize. So you can have placeholder variables where you can then insert a custom sentence. So it's sort of like a semi-customized email. So it's super fascinating. People are 5 to 8 times more likely to reply. And you get a much higher return on investment when you have personalization. So content creation, super useful. And I'm sure we've all seen that you can use it to generate images and video, even in some cases. Those are still a little more in the early stages, but are advancing rapidly. And it's, you know, little interesting to think about what the future will look like, considering kind of, can we even tell if a photo is real? But that's all just to say too, that you want to be really careful if you're creating photos, especially if you're creating photos of specific people, because there are ethical considerations to consider for deep fakes, etc. And so you just want to be really careful about that. You don't want to create somebody's likeness without their consent. But we are entering a stage where you can create hyper-realistic videos and images of people, and it's fascinating yet a little creepy simultaneously. Use case example number 3. So this is less so an AI example, and this is more so, again, something that we found is extremely high value to people, just using kind of traditional automation. But you can create custom portals and applications that are unique to your use case. So, you'll see all kinds of software services that they're trying to sell you their thing, whatever, and maybe it does what you need it to do, maybe it doesn't, maybe it needs to be heavily configured to your use case. We especially see this a lot in the nonprofit sector, where they get convinced to use some tool, but then instead of a 3-month implementation, it takes 14 months, and it still doesn't exactly do what they want it to do. You can use automation to create custom portals that are unique to your use case. So you can create portals and applications that do exactly what you want it to do within the context of your database, or within the context of your Salesforce instance. And you don't have to, go spend $100,000 on some third-party software tool to do this. There's systems you can use where, the cost is much lower. You can work with kind of existing software modules. You can work again with low-code tools in some cases. But it's not a situation where you need to build this from scratch. Oftentimes, we see people kind of go into the direction of like out-of-the-box third-party systems versus going and hiring a big team of developers and building some custom application from scratch. Neither of them are good. We've seen people, when they go from scratch, we've seen people spend $1 million building something, and then it still doesn't do what they want it to do. Then they have a bunch of tech debt. But then on the other hand, we see people do the other thing, where they go and ultimately they spend $100,000 on some third-party software, and then they get locked in. Their data's trapped in there. It's in some specific format that's hard to migrate, and it still doesn't do exactly what they want it to do, and now they're locked in. There's sort of this middle of the road option where you can configure software modules that are lower cost than these out-of-the-box systems, but also not as complex as building something from scratch, where you can configure them into a portal like this. So more to say there. And we found this to be really useful, because the other thing with these systems is that oftentimes we'll see organizations do these acquisitions, or they'll buy some third-party software out of the box, but then it still doesn't help them reduce the amount of emails that they're sending to their customers, or it's just another thing that their people have to learn. And what's really useful about these portals is that you can have them be both internal facing for you, where you see some specific stuff, but then also customer facing, where your customers can sign in, or your end users can sign in, they can interact with it, they can upload stuff, they can see the status of things, they can see their history. So it's super interesting, and it's super useful. We're seeing a growing trend of people wanting to do this with custom portals, because the other thing, of course, is you can make these portals AI enabled as well, where they can have AI systems that are used for interacting with stuff the customer uploads. They're used for, again, chatbots, where it can answer questions about your specific orders. And it's quite interesting in that way. So next use case that we want to talk about, this one's a little bit more obscure, but this is one of the actually most common use cases in the business world for AI systems. You can use fine-tuned AI systems to extract data automatically from documents. and images. And so say you upload a picture of a receipt, you can use it to figure out what was the total amount you spent, what were the items on the receipt, what's the tax that you spent, what was the date, et cetera. And so this is an interface that we had set up to extract data automatically from invoices. And you can see here kind of, whoops. The objective of this video is just accidentally click the demo. You can see here on this next page, what kind of the output looks like, where this is a document, and then you can see here on the right side there were key fields recognized. This is super useful, and this is actually one of the most common use cases for AI in business right now, is taking this unstructured data in a PDF or an image or a Word document, and then putting it into a structured format that you can then send to Salesforce or SharePoint or some other business system that you're using. It's super fascinating and can really dramatically help reduce manual entry. We've seen people that have whole teams dedicated to manual entry that then once you set up a system like this, those teams can then focus on higher value work. One kind of thing that we've seen anecdotally is that when you set up a system that does data entry automatically, the people that were doing the data entry before, in our experience, generally just do something else at the company. So they don't get laid off and they don't get, made obsolete. They just get to focus on other kind of more value-added tasks. So it's just to say that, like, there's an element of helping people do the things that are, again, these higher value tasks, rather than saying like, hey, you just got to come in and do data entry all day. So super exciting stuff. This is, again, something that, in addition to extracting the data, once you extract it, then you can, again, apply these business rules to it, where you can say, like, okay, if the invoice total is over this amount, do X, Y, Z. If tax wasn't collected, do this. There's all kinds of things you can do once you have the data, that then you can operate on it and say, okay, hey, what does this actually look like? And you can have these different things you want to do with it, whether that's, again, escalating it, sending a notification, or whether that's categorizing it in a certain way. All kinds of things you can do with it. Super interesting. Okay, so then the next use case, this is super interesting. So there's a lot you can say too about, in addition to extracting it, like I was kind of just alluding to a little bit, you can also classify the data once you have it. So say, you're getting submissions from people, and there's all kinds of things you can think about. We had a client that was doing a large scale poetry contest, and they were receiving thousands of poems from different people, and they were kind of thinking about, how can we sort of tell quickly if these poems have like sort of sensitive content, because the rules of the poetry contest were you couldn't have the poems be like hateful or violent, or some of these other criteria. And traditionally, you would have to use like keyword filters, where you're looking for all kinds of keywords to see, like, okay, this might be referencing this, but people can spell things really differently. We've all seen, like, you spell a curse word with, the @ symbol instead of an A, or, the $ instead of an S. So there's all kinds of creative ways people can like say certain words without actually saying them. And you can use AI tools to classify them. So you can see here on the left side, that's an example where you can tell, if the content that you're absorbing, whether, again, it's an image or text, etc., whether it's sexual or hateful or violent, or contains information about self-harm, etc. So super, super helpful, especially if you are getting a large amount of data that you need to moderate in some way. Besides classifying it in sort of this moderation category, you can classify things for research, but you can also, as you can see here on the right, this is a picture of me when I had longer hair. We could classify data in a video stream or images as well. So you can see in this case, this was a PPE tracker we created, where you could see if someone's wearing, gloves and a face cover and a hard hat, and if they're a person. So you can count the number of people in a facility. You can count if there's anybody who's not wearing a hard hat. So super useful. You can think of in a compliance context or a health and safety context. But then also in manufacturing, this is another one that we have seen be really useful, where you can use a computer vision system for defect tracking. And so you can see here's an example where it's like, this is a microchip that was trained with a series of images on what is a broken or what does a defective component look like, and what does a conforming, non-defective component look like. And you can see here that on the left side, you've got one with bent pins that was going through the assembly line, and that was not going to work from a manufacturing quality perspective. And then you've got this one on the right here that does not have bent pins. And so it's super interesting because in some of these cases, again, you need to fine tune the system in order to be able to output results accurately. But in this case, this was only a handful of images were uploaded. This was a super simple use case. You can see, hey, does this have bent pins or not? But you can get quite sophisticated with it. And I should mention that for the majority of the examples I'm talking about here, these are not large language models. This is not like a chat GPT doing this. It's important to remember that when we're talking about AI tools, there are large language models. There's your chat GPT, there's your Claude, there's your Gemini, there's your open source tools like Llama, and then a handful of others like XAI or whatever that are sort of less relevant to the kind of high impact business world. There's all kinds of other entrants in the open source world as well. Large language models are a huge part of what's kind of going on in the AI conversation, but there's also quite a lot of more focused tools that you can use for computer vision and other AI use cases that are more like you could call them machine learning models that do one specific thing, but they do it super, super well. And it doesn't require necessarily as much configuration as, say, like a chat GPT might for a computer vision use case. So again, computer vision is where we're seeing a lot of the immediate use cases for AI outside of kind of people using large language models for like summarizing documents or for generating content. But using it for classification, definitely a super high impact use case and super fascinating as well. So yeah, I just kind of alluded to that as well, but you can see the sort of zooming in further. So we've got the extraction of data, you've got the classification of data, now you've got also the analysis of data. So kind of like I was just saying, many businesses have large decentralized data sets and documents, and you can use AI systems to process these huge documents and almost instantaneously answer questions. And so you can imagine that's super useful for a lot of areas. But one example that we saw is using it for grant applications. And so, nonprofits, doing grant activities definitely can, get quite a lot of use case out of this, where they're seeing these 300-page documents that have all of these requirements in them. You can use these systems to do that. I'm sure you've got other use cases you can think of where that's the case, but you can also use it, say, if you upload a spreadsheet, you can use it for large-scale analytics or statistical regression. You can use it to pair, again, with traditional sort of code-based algorithms that it takes the data, that it structures it, and then it puts it through this mathematical model that's not AI. So super cool, super interesting. Critically too, ChatGPT out of the box, if it's a long document, and this is, again, Claude, whatever, like they're not as good at analyzing super large documents. So if you are trying to do this for like a business production use case, we do suggest doing what we were saying with the chatbot use case, where you fine tune it or you supplement it with custom data so that it can answer the questions in a more configurable way. Because ChatGPT out of the box, if it's a long document, it just isn't as good at it. It will struggle to answer questions, especially if the document is long. So if you upload a 100-page document, it will try, but it's just not as good as you might want it to be for a production use case. Super interesting stuff, though. We've seen a lot of value come out of this. People also use these for things like analyzing legislation, which is fascinating. And so we had a use case where we were analyzing all of the legislation in the state of Connecticut, and it was fascinating, and it remains fascinating. Cool. So then similarly, and I keep jumping the gun on these next slides, but like I was just saying, you can use it for government affairs as well. So, we're talking about evaluating legislation. So you look at a bill, you look at policy analysis, you look at fiscal notes, et cetera, and it can help you align actions with priorities. It can also help understand your policy positions and help you create issue briefs, action alerts, social media toolkits, and other advocacy materials to kind of speed up advocating in your issue specific position. So pretty interesting stuff there. So I kind of touched on this one. You can use it on large data sets for statistical analysis, but I'm sure we've all related to this photo on the right where we need to make a spreadsheet to keep track of all of our spreadsheets. So I won't go into too much detail because I think I've already kind of spoken on this one a bit. But again, you can take the data, structure it, and then put it through an actual statistical algorithm that you wrote that's not AI. Super interesting, and definitely helpful for speeding up things if you have a huge amount of data. Okay, so this next one is not exclusively AI. This is a tool that you can install. But one of the things that we hear a lot from people is they don't know what their customers are doing. If you have a website or if you have something electronic that you need people to interact with, you can use tools like this to basically analyze your user behavior on your website and optimize the interface to make sure they're doing what you want them to do. So this tool that we're looking at here is called Microsoft Clarity, and this is a free tool. Emphasis that this is completely free. This is something that Microsoft offers out of the box that you can install on your website, totally privacy controlled and very configurable for security. This does not record users. Just to be clear, this is not recording user sessions. This is creating what are called session replays, where it's programmatically recreating the session based on what the user is doing with the code. So it's not recording the screen or anything like that. It's saying, hey, this user clicked this button and we recorded that with code. But it's not actually saying like, let's take a video of the person using it. It's saying, we saw you press this button and with code, we can then do the session replay. So you can see here, it's useful for seeing user behavior, but also for seeing a heat map on your website or on your application of where people are clicking things. We found this be super useful for answering questions like, what are people actually doing? Is this actually a useful page on my website? Is this actually a widget that people care about, or is this just something that we thought was cool? So this is something you could install today on your website if you wanted to, but we've seen a huge amount of mileage come out of using Microsoft Clarity. There's other tools like Full Story that exist, but those can be aggressively expensive, like 5-figure kind of expensive, even 6-figure, depending on how many users you have. So experiment with Clarity before you go into these paid tools. Amplify is another one that you see people using, but it's like 9 times out of 10, you don't need to spend $50,000 to do this. So look at Microsoft Clarity, see what's going on. Okay, so then the other use case we really wanted to touch on as kind of a closing point is marketing. People really emphasize to us that one of the biggest pain points that everybody has is marketing, outreach, lead generation, etc. So not every business is based on cold outreach, but quite a lot of businesses do this sort of outbound marketing. So you can use AI systems like Clay or like Apollo to generate leads, where you can research people, you can find their email addresses, and you can reach out to them. Critically, you can also use AI and automated systems for generating these emails. So like I said earlier in the meeting, we create an email that's semi-personalized that is kind of tailored to the specific prospect that you're trying to reach out to. It can really help with marketing, can understand the lead's context and pain points against your sort of automation that you're applying to it. Critically, these systems can be used for sending emails, but then also for sending follow-up emails. 9 times out of 10, you have to follow up a couple times in order for somebody to really kind of engage with you. And so you can set this up where it sends the initial cold email or whatever that's AI generated. Then it waits a certain period of time, say it waits 6 days, then you send another email, then it waits another 6 days or whatever. There's different schools of thought about how many follow-up emails to send, but we found 3 to 4 total emails are helpful. So you're following up to 3 times, where you send kind of the initial email, then you wait, then you send a follow-up, then you wait, then you send a second follow-up, then you wait, and then you send what's called the breakup email, where you just say like, hey, I guess this isn't interesting or whatever. But super useful, because we've all been there where you're sending cold emails and it's not fun to do manually. And more to say about that and how to do that. Don't use your primary domain to do that. Create sort of secondary domains that you use for kind of these mass email campaigns. But the only other thing I'll say, and a lot of businesses sleep on this, but this is something that we have seen a lot of clients like really excel in when we set these systems up, is use these tools also for public relations. So you can use these things to pitch journalists, to get featured in, things like the New York Times or whatever, and sending out media to journalists that might want to write about you. So we've seen people kind of get into big publications doing this. We saw one client use these tools. They got into the Wall Street Journal. They got 8 million views in one day, and then they got featured on LinkedIn News, and it dramatically increased their business in sort of a really meaningful way. So it's not just marketing. You can use it for public relations, and it's very cool. So this is just a screenshot of kind of what we're talking about. This tool is called Smart Lead. And you can see, so you've got your first email, then you wait 6 days, then you've got your second email here on the left. But what's really cool about this is you can see what I'm talking about here, where in the subject line, you see how it's a semi-customized email subject. You've got a placeholder variable for the first name, placeholder variable for the industry, et cetera. And then within the actual email body, you've obviously got their first name, but then you've also got, variation on what the sentence is, as well as variation on, use cases, timeframes, et cetera. So this is super useful, and this is definitely something that is a huge trend. And so, yeah, this is definitely like one of the things that we see a lot of people also seeing as sort of low-hanging fruit. So yeah, that's it for the use cases, but we just want to emphasize that if you have staff, it's helpful to train them on AI and automation use cases to identify what to focus on. I think if you look at a webinar like this, or if you look at some training content, it helps to kind of give you the light bulb moment of like, oh, this is what I could focus on. Like, great. So it's just to say, like, review your current state, do discovery, develop your training materials, train your employees, ideally in small class sizes across departments, use their feedback to generate ideas. So we're big on management by walking around, figuring out what people and their pain points are within your organization by talking to them, and then conduct that exercise annually. And empowering people to make them feel like their voices are heard can not only help discover the high priority pain points, but also help them feel like their voice is important and that they're involved, which can help with when you actually ultimately are implementing change. So best practices, like I was saying, we want to start with low-hanging fruit. So I think I've definitely kind of touched on that. I don't want to feed a fed horse, if you will, but start with the low-hanging fruit, identify repetitive tasks that can be automated first after an operations audit. So again, the high frequency, high impact stuff is what you want to focus on. Prioritize integrating data. So before you kind of optimize or before you kind of apply tech to a workflow, make sure the workflow is optimized in the sense that you've got the number of steps reduced, that it actually makes sense to be doing what you're doing. Because, if you are optimizing something that shouldn't even be happening in the first place, you're kind of losing the forest for the trees a little bit. So make sure that your tools work well together, that you have kind of a good sort of vision in place of what you want your future state to be before you just start applying AI and tech to your processes. Because oftentimes, even without technology at all, from an operational excellence standpoint, you can reduce the number of steps, or you can simplify things in a meaningful way. We're big on the philosophy of perfection is not achieved when there is nothing else to add, but when there is nothing else to take away. Keep it scalable, so implement solutions that can grow with your business. Oftentimes when you're in the early stage of a business, if you're in founder mode, or if you're a startup, or if you don't have product market fit yet, then it is good to do things that don't scale. It's good to kind of do these experiments and sort of iterations that are rapid. But once you have something that's working and you're going to have to do it a ton of times, implement solutions that can grow with your business. And so, think about, if I had 1,000 more of these tasks, like what would I do? And so once you're in that stage where you might conceivably have 1,000, that's when you want to really think about that. And then test and optimize. So regularly review the results, refine your automated processes, and improve efficiency. Make sure you're also monitoring for errors or for any things that might be edge cases. Because again, sometimes you might have an edge case that only shows up like 1 in every 10,000 times. But if it happens, you want to be aware of it, and you want to understand why with a root cause analysis. Ideally, you want to understand those things before you deploy a system to production. And then finally, pitfalls and how to avoid them. Overcomplicating things. So like I said, look at your initial operation, understand what is useful for your business. Try to keep it as simple as possible, like I was saying. And with tools and AI systems, it's easy to feel like what you're doing is cool or that it's like, oh, this is really exciting and like fun to work on. But it's not always useful for your business, like I've been saying. So it's like you don't need to recreate Facebook, or you don't need to create the sort of scalability of Uber where you can handle a billion, data points on your server. Um, just keep it simple, basically. Make sure that the systems you set up are customized to your needs. So that's where, again, I would be careful about working with third-party software, because oftentimes they're trying to guide you into their paradigm of what the system should be doing so that you'll buy their software, as opposed to really listening to you about what your unique problems are and making a system that's designed for your needs. Where again, that doesn't mean go build some custom software from scratch where you give someone $1 million. It's to say, make sure that you can customize it to your use case and understand your unique needs before you go and spend money on anything. Um, Obligatory mention to security: properly configure your access permissions. Make sure you're using principles of least access, where only people that have access, that need to have access to the data, can access it. Minimize everybody's permissions, and make sure you have security controls configured, especially if you're using AI tools. So by default, with things like the OpenAI integration, it is not trained on your business data. But if you're using ChatGPT, there's actually a setting that you need to turn off so that it's not using your data for training. So make sure you're just thinking about those things, because we've all seen what can happen. The webinar that we did earlier this year on cybersecurity horror stories in Connecticut, stuff can happen and it can be painful. So don't sleep on security. And then finally, this last bullet point is sort of underappreciated, but oftentimes one of the most critically important things when implementing a new system. We found that creating the technology system is not actually always the hardest part. A lot of the time, the hardest part is just getting the employees, the team that you're working with, to use the system and to embrace the system, even if it works perfectly. So oftentimes you see this disconnect where leadership really wants the new system, but then, you know, the sort of non-leadership team will sort of resist the system or think the change is bad, or will kind of see it as something negative or adding more work to their life. And so that's where, again, making these initiatives something that are collaborative, hearing the perspectives of employees, getting their feedback on what the wish list might be, where you say, like, what's your ideal use case here? What's your perfect future state? And being able to say, hey, your voice matters here. Your voice is important in this conversation. That really helps ultimately, once you're implementing the system, to not only have employee buy-in, but to get people to use it and to minimize the possibility that somebody may, you know, revolt or whatever, or have a mutiny, or try to sabotage the process in some way. So underestimating employee buy-in is another pitfall that we've seen. All right. So with that, I know we got a couple more minutes left of the meeting. I think we'll open it up to Q&A. And yeah, if anybody has any questions, definitely feel free to drop them here in the Q&A. So whether it's a question or whether anybody wants to share a hair on fire problem or an anecdote or a pain point, feel free to drop in whatever you may have.
Thank you, Rock, for that presentation. That was very informative and insightful, and we will open it up for Q&A for the last couple of minutes, and Rock has his contact information on the screen as well. Okay, so I don't see any questions as of now, but like I said, Rock's information is on the screen, so feel free to reach out to him. And if you would like to be a part of our technology council, please feel free to reach out to Rock, Dave, or Glenn, who is on our staff, and they can get you situated. But I thank you all for joining us today, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thanks, everybody.